A very warm welcome to Danielle Macleod, our first brilliant Blethers guest on our podcast. So first of all, I just want to introduce this wonderful queen of leadership. She really has one foot in two different worlds. She has been at one time customer service director for Sky, responsible for leading a team of 10,000. So she's very, very familiar with leading at scale. But at the same time, she's always been searching for a way of leading that was more thoughtful, more expansive, really just more true. So the kind of leadership that she is interested in really sits at the intersection between soul and strategy. She set up Wise Rebel to offer leaders a way of navigating this kind of complexity without completely losing themselves. So I just want to start us off really with my first question, which is, what is the myth about leadership that you would like to debunk for us all, based on the experience and the years that you've spent in these kind of roles?
Can I have two?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Start with
Because
one.
I think one is no one's going to give you a blueprint that works for you. Loads of people, including me, have written some great blueprints. I hope I've written a half decent one, but it's not the whole picture. And so I always say to people, particularly if they're doing personal work, if anyone comes to you and says, "Oh, I've found the way," like, run a mile, because in my opinion, there's no such thing, and when loads and loads of people have written astonishing things about leadership, but I always inside have a little cry when somebody goes on leadership training that kind of says, and do this and do this and do this, as if it's a process chart. And the reality of life is you have a unique style that is appropriate for you. That's the thing I would argue that you want to leverage. And maybe I've got some ideas that you can throw into your pot because they feel resonant with you. But actually, the best form of leadership, in my mind, is the one that feels most aligned to the truth of you on the inside. That's not a particularly easy thing to find, I don't think, because we live and work in environments that encourage us to behave in very specific ways. And so the second myth I would blow out of the water is that you can personally build the perfect leadership template, and that the things you want are what everybody else wants. So, I had a really big lesson about 3 years ago, because I live with one foot in two worlds, also in the sense that I live in Findhorn Eco Village, which some people may have heard of or not. I moved here 3 years ago for a whole variety of reasons, and this is a very unusual place. But one of the things that happens when you buy a home in Findhorn, some people call it an eco village, I do, other people call it a spiritual community, it's kind of evolved over the years, is you have to sign up. Before you can buy a home, you have to sign up to a set of agreements that essentially say, this is how I will live while I live here. And I was really excited. I wasn't naive, but I was very excited to come to a place where people had essentially signed up to a template, a way of living, only to discover that this place was as full of human beings as anyone else, anywhere else, and that we didn't have agreement on a load of things that I expected we would have agreement on.
Yeah.
And so this idea, I think, and maybe it was my own myth that I had to debunk, that if only we built the perfect model, an organization would perfectly flourish. Or if only we build the perfect model, a society will perfectly flourish. Or if only we build the perfect model, the world will perfectly flourish. I think with a little bit of grief, those of us who have a longing for that need to upgrade our thinking to a different idea. And it's tough, right? To say, I'm going to be here and I'm going to contribute in the most meaningful way I can, but I have to get over the idea that everyone's going to agree with me or that we can create the perfect thing.
Yeah.
And for me, that was hard because, to be honest with you, even when I wrote Remarkable Leadership, which I'm sure we'll get to, I think back in the day, and I'm changing my thinking on some of it now because I've lived longer and I've experimented with it for longer. I was trying to go, here's a great blueprint. If only you would all do this, then we would be fine. Well, nice idea, but I think part of going to Wise Rebel and actually building new work, the leadership dilemma, is too many of the big questions. There are no neat answers.
Yeah, yeah. So there's so much in that, Danielle. And what I love is just hearing your evolution
Yeah.
from remarkable leadership, because there are a couple of concepts, particularly in that book, that I think will be really helpful to explore. Before we go there, though, I am curious about, I think about, you just talked about, to what extent can we change our behavior if we are working in a system, whether it's in Findhorn or whether it's in an organization? To what extent is it the system we're in that dictates how we behave, or do we have a capacity ourselves, even within a system that is dysfunctional, to be able to operate in alignment with who we are at our essence?
I knew this was going to be a juicy conversation. You asked such good question. So, in my opinion, and again, I just want to say to everybody who's listening, I'm offering an opinion. It's been experimented with a lot, researched a lot. I just hold a piece of the picture, nothing more than that. I think let's just acknowledge one thing first. I think there are many organizations, there are many systems where it is not particularly safe to make major adaptations to behavior or to push back against
Yeah.
systems. And I think we must acknowledge that sometimes, for reasons of survival or whatever that looks like, we find ourselves in a position where it's very difficult to exit from those systems. I don't think everyone has the privilege of making values-based decisions every day.
Yeah.
And I do think we need to acknowledge that. I can get pretty annoyed out there with this whole idea that women should speak up all the time without acknowledging the systems they're in or the consequences of speaking up, or in fact, even training better ways of speaking up, which in many ways, in my mind, involve having more than just you doing the speaking, right? So, it's crazy to me to be saying speak your truth all the time without layers of thought
Yeah.
around that. And then if we were to, but I also do believe that for many of us, there are opportunities, and really this is the wise rebel principle, I guess, to say, I don't need to shame that system. That's not usually very helpful. But I do believe there are many, many moments of truth in our leadership where we are being challenged. Is this a moment where you will fade your ethics, fade your values, or will you find a way to stand in a truer place for yourself? I think that takes exploration. I think it takes commitment. I think there's such a lot of work for most of us to do on caring less about what people think about us.
Yeah.
And I think that's extraordinarily hard work. Like there was a teacher that I used to follow who said, the thing that gets us most is the fear of humiliation, and actually we are very led by, we're tribal animals at the end of the day. We are led by the containers that we're in. So
Yeah.
do I think we can change within them? 100%, but I think it takes extraordinary commitment. And then I think we have to get a few slaps along the way when we do it really naively, and we have to adapt and learn how to do that. And I have tried for the last 10 years to create containers that teach people ways that may be more effective than just blurting out, I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that, or that's wrong, or whatever it might be. But I think you have to, at some point, with grace, say, I see the system. And as far as possible, I will not tolerate in its, what's the word, in the edges where it pushes its luck or it crosses the lines.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? At the edges where it crosses the line or where it pushes its luck. I think so. And you talked about values there, and I'm thinking about my friend Sonia Noss, who talked about the importance of having your values, like using it like a passport in the borderlands. That's when you need your values, is when you're kind of in those outskirts and in that level of vulnerability. And what I'm hearing you saying, Danielle, is that you can challenge, but you need to do the work on yourself to be able to cultivate enough grace to do it in a way, in the first instance, where it lands, I guess, where the other person can hear it. And what we tend to do in, as you say, quite naive ways and often quite challenging ways is just offer criticism or just be the rebel, right? The rebel has a lot of energy, but sometimes the rebel without grace is going to end up, ultimately being the whistleblower that then just gets.
Yeah, no one listens to.
Exactly. Nobody else to do, or actually, and I do think I can't remember where I read this, but women are far more likely to be whistleblowers, and they're also far more likely to then to get outed of the company because,
Extraordinarily dangerous
yeah,
role to take on. And history tells us that over and over and over again. Systems don't like being revealed. Even good people don't like to see bad stories, right? And so we know this, we know it everywhere. And the other thing I would say, because I'm a woman of a certain age, and I've certainly had to navigate a level of anger in my system that I haven't had for most of my lifetime. And I had an incident recently where I really let rip publicly on somebody, and I'm okay with that. But often people will come to me and say things like, well, hang on a minute, anger's a good thing, it helps us express ourselves, and sometimes people need to be on the receiving end of anger. I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I'm still in an exploration of anger. I think I will be till my dying days, to be honest. It's a very complex emotion. I think it has a lot of nuance. What I saw, though, and this is what I would offer to people who are committed to creating a level of change in the world, is at the peak of my anger, I became extraordinarily stupid and inarticulate. So I was having my buttons pressed, and then garbage was coming out of my mouth in a more and more angry way. And I'm not saying I could have persuaded the person that I was having the conversation with that he was wrong and I was right. I believe I was on this one. It was a human rights issue. There are some lines I'm just not going to be moved on. But what I saw was anger incapacitated me.
yeah,
And a lot of my work, and particularly the work I'm sort of just bringing out into the world right now, is about how do I root myself? How do I prepare with reps? Like as if I was going to the gym for these moments where life is going to try and take me off my feet.
yeah,
And that matters because in that scenario, I was so affected by this single conversation that lasted about 20 minutes. I think it took me 3 or 4 days to recover.
yeah,
Well, that was 3 or 4 days of me on the bench and also
yeah,
ranting and just venting and really noticing my body. And so I'm really interested in the pathways that allow us to maintain ourselves, our sense of self, when life messes with our plans in whatever way it does. And of course, the danger about inviting those lessons into your life is you just get your plans and mess with a lot more. You get more practice ground. But
tilting it.
in the wise rebel world, what I'm saying really is how do we wisely break the rules? I'm not always a fan of the Dalai Lama, but there was a great quote that said, and there are other teachers who would say it, we must learn the rules of the world in the first half of life so that we know how to break them wisely in the second half.
Yeah,
So I do think you have to get familiar with the system. You want to map it, you want to see it. You also have to get familiar with how you play in the system. What are your vulnerabilities? Where do you naturally throw the towel in? All of these things. You have to learn all of that before you will break rules in a way that is impactful and useful. So I'm not a break rules for the hell of it person on any level, but let's be honest. We live in systems that are doing things that are not healthy for us, for the planet, for other human beings. And some of the rules need to be broken wisely.
yeah. So, what would you say are the, say, top 3 skills that we need to learn in order to break those rules wisely?
Yeah. So I'm going to write them down because I'll forget. Even though you're asking me, I've got two and I'll have three by the time we get there. So I've mentioned two of them already, but I think they matter and I think we could spend a lot of time with them. So the first is our capacity to navigate uncertainty.
Yeah,
And I've been running research for at least 6 months now. I've been interviewing cross-sector, anyone who I can get my hands on in leadership who will talk to me about what they think the future looks like. What is very clear to me is I ask a single question. Every time I do a research project, I ask a question at the end. I didn't know how good this question was, right? But I've done 4 in 10 years, and this question always nails the zeitgeist for me. And so it's a really powerful question. I always get a common theme. And the question is, if I could download any piece of knowledge or skill into you overnight, and you could just wake up with it, what would you want? And
love it.
every time I've run this research, entirely different questions, entirely different themes every time. I just land this question at the end and I wait and see what happens. So this time, the answer has been very clear. Mostly people have said the equivalent of, I'd like a crystal ball.
Yeah,
And I've never heard that before. And so, and then other people have gone, can you help me navigate uncertainty? They may not use those exact words, but that's the theme that is coming through. And so my hypothesis right now in this era, we're July 20th as we have this conversation. I don't know when it will be released, but I don't think things are going to change that dramatically. My hypothesis is your generation, my generation, hasn't appreciated the level of certainty that we have.
Yeah.
So I'm 51. When I graduated, well, the deal was, as I grew up, if you can, you go to university. If you can't, you go and get a qualification somewhere else.
Yeah.
Then you go and get a job. And depending on whether you're male or female, obviously, there's going to be a different landscape for you to navigate. But broadly speaking, yeah, you'll be able to earn enough money to buy a house with somebody else, possibly on your own. And you will be able to stack enough money in the bank to retire at a relatively young age in comparison to how long you're going to live for. And we have contracted with those who employ us on that basis. We might not have known it, but that's the kind of system we've been in. That's extraordinarily flat line laid out. Everybody's going to get made redundant, but you get a little bit of money in your pocket. The UK's not bad at employment law. You wouldn't want to be in America. That's a totally different game. But we've had this level of predictability in the middle class. And I think that time is coming to an end. Therefore, there will be some people who will lose jobs too soon.
Yeah.
It's already happening. We know that. The redundancy money won't last long enough to tide you over in the way it did previously. We've got kids leaving university who can't get work, who are taking some of the jobs that the kids who didn't go to university would have had previously. We've got pubs and restaurants struggling to stay afloat, who were traditionally the employers of those kinds of people. So we've got cracks in the system, and they aren't getting better. We've got an aging population that we can't fund particularly well. And then we've got, God bless it, AI coming in, and who knows, let's just call it the agent of possibility and chaos. I think that's its current role, right? And so you can't have one without the other, can you? Like, it's doing a bit of both. And so I think we are not well equipped, our generation, to lead into this next era, because we don't know uncertainty very well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just thinking about that. So in some ways, what you're saying is because we grew up with a level of certainty, we just didn't need to learn the kind of skills that you would need in order to be able to find your comfort in the midst of the chaos.
Yeah. We haven't had to handle a lot of shocks, most definitely. I mean, that's a historically significant moment. But we haven't lived a war, as in it hasn't been on our territory. It's been a long time since a recession. We have had this the middle classes have, I'm not saying everybody else have, we've had this relatively stable period. And I don't think we've been doing our uncertainty reps. Like, I think we've got comfortable and we've kind of gone. And so now what happens? Shit, what do we do now? And so what I'm experiencing is I'm speaking to leaders who are having this fascinating conversation with me. When I say, what do you think your future looks like? They're like, I'll be okay, which I question actually with some of the industries that they're in and what's happening. My team might not be, but I'll be okay. And of course, what we know is we're going to do what we always do, which is chop bottom up. I mean, that's the game. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas straight away. That comes a little bit later on. Inevitably, some roles are going to take longer to evolve and change. Then, so they talk about their teams, and some of them say, oh, my teams are going to get smaller, blah, 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 but I'll be all right because I've only got to go for this long. And then I ask them about their children, and it's like I'm speaking to a different person. So I say, how do you feel about your children entering the future of work? And they just kind of go, a few of them go, actually, I think they've chosen really well. Like, my child's trained to be a physio or blah, blah, blah. But a lot of them are kind of questioning all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is, so let's take Germany as an example. In Germany, kids are coming out of, it's not so expensive to go to university, so you don't build the same level of debt you would in the UK. Obviously, it's really reasonable in Scotland. But what's happening is these kids are going back and doing another year of a master's as if that's going to help them get into the job market.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see a period where part of our struggle will be because we didn't want to see it coming and we didn't prepare ourselves to be mentally more stable. I'm not saying we can just be robots. Like, I don't think that's the thing. To mentally be more stable and be more prepared for life messing with our plan.
Do you also think that there's a factor human beings are not great at preparing for change without that element of chaos? And do you also think that because of how society is evolving at the moment, it's actually a middle class section? The leaders that you're talking to are middle class. And it's actually that's the section, that's the demographic of society that are now going to be impacted negatively and possibly because of their privilege, they are not seeing it coming. And it's only when you ask that question about their kids that suddenly there's a little kind of flashbulb moment. But they're probably still believing that actually I'm going to be all right, Jack.
Yeah. Well, historically, as far as I can see, apart from major war times, we've never had a revolution, and this is an industrial revolution, let's be honest about it, whatever it turns
Yeah.
out to be. It's certainly the narrative we're building, where
Yeah.
the middle class have been affected so significantly. And so, part of me doing the research I did was because I grew up in St. Helens in the miners' strikes, and little girl, like, I don't know, 6 or 7, and I watched my friends' dads on the picket lines and lose their jobs. And so there was something for me about, I saw that pain very
Yeah.
viscerally. As a young child, I definitely absorbed it, of saying, gosh, this is interesting. Who is going to get caught in the crossfire this time? And I think the middle class isn't, I count myself as one of those. I grew up in inner city Liverpool, so I've, again, one foot in two worlds. I have a very unusual life, but I think the middle classes have had sympathy for that, but we haven't really piled on wealth inequality as an issue, because largely speaking, it's not been affecting us. We
Yeah.
might have had to rein things in a little bit, but
Yeah.
we are seeing that it's affecting people. And we're seeing it in a number of ways. Supermarkets in the UK, they're attributing a lot of it to GLP-1s, are projecting a revenue loss of 750 million this year, right? We are spending less on food. You've got charity shops saying people are selling everything on Vinted, right? We are finding ways to hold on to our money differently. We're becoming more sensitive
Mhm.
to price changes. I think the coaching industry is definitely feeling, I can buy that large language model for 20 quid, or I could pay a coach, for example. Do you know what? I'll try the 20 quid thing. We are seeing people trend wise spending less
Mm.
on certain things. So I think people are smelling something. And my invitation right now is there is more we can do at a personal level
Yeah.
to prepare for what might be coming. And I think we can do that. Those of us who like self-transformation, who like personal development, who like to grow our self-awareness, you can make that a beautiful curiosity.
Yeah.
What does take me out? Who has the power in a sentence to do this to me? What would happen if I woke up tomorrow? And because in the old days, when somebody said, oh, you're on a list for redundancy, for example, any of us would have gone, that's fine. I'll take my year and then I'll go and get another job. I don't think that's the same environment now.
No, and there's much more kind of fear and concern and uncertainty about whether there will be a kind of job, particularly if you're kind of at our age. It's like, are those kind of jobs even available out there? And
Yeah.
would I be able to do them?
And so the game doesn't become, which has been the old game, and I think we have been very influenced in the UK by American style
Yeah.
prosperity, manifest your future, mindset your way out of everything, which I've been part of. I don't want to say that I haven't. And I think that there's really a place for mindset. But for me, there's a place for pragmatic, real mindset that
Yeah.
says, instead of I can have whatever I want, or I'll be the one who races through, we do that kind of pre-mortem thing that the Stoics talked about so much, which is, and what if that doesn't? What would I do in a scenario where I can't get a job for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? And how do I steady my insides
Mm.
to not freak out
Yeah.
when that happens?
Yeah.
But also, how do I steady myself when I see my organization making more and more brutal decisions? Who am I going to be in those moments, even if it's not affecting me?
Yeah.
There are all these places where I think we have to start the inner work now, not be like, shit, I hope I'm okay when it happens. Because the hardest time to find our core is in chaos.
Yeah.
If we haven't got familiar with it,
Yeah. So with that in mind, you are bringing us very neatly onto some of the amazing ways that you offer. I highly recommend this book actually to anyone out there. Really, really, really useful. So yeah, again, I mean, you've got the idea of this, the sovereignty, the queenship that we need to start to embody in ourselves, and
Yeah.
actually showing up with that level of, I would say, kind of self-respect in
Mm,
terms of how we hold ourselves, and
mm,
also self-compassion in those moments where things do get very, very difficult and we are put on the line and our values are put on the line. But
mm,
you also talk a lot about, you talk about ruthless compassion, but also profound service.
mm.
And I'm curious about how you can use those two elements for exactly what you're talking about, which is to ground us and prepare us for what's coming.
Yeah. So let's go to profound service first. I talk about three elements of what I describe as sovereign leadership or queen leadership in that book. Profound service to me, and I do think this is a call of our time. I do think this is a call of our time. Profound service to me says, I am on this world to leave it a little better than I found. Let's make it as simple as that. Or at the very least, to not have the earth say, God, I wish she was never born because she just left debris everywhere. I'm not so much a legacy person. I'm simply that we are custodians of this earth for future generations. And we are probably one of the first generations that are making it worse for the ones that come after. And that's considered quite well documented now.
Yeah.
So the idea of profound service, I think, matters particularly right now because I think we have become, and I will be honest and say, I think social media is another one. It's like chaos and possibility, right? Social media has done some very good things, but it has also done an outstanding job at polarizing, like outstanding. And I mean, second to none. I don't think we've ever seen anything with the level of global capacity to get people at different positions. I think we have had an era in the Western world where we've become very individualistic. I mean, that started right back in, I was watching the end of some series, Legends it was yesterday. I didn't actually watch it, but I just saw the end of it. My husband was watching it, and it was Thatcher leaving post, and me saying to my husband, do you know when she was asked, I'm a politics graduate, when she was asked what was her greatest legacy, she said New Labour, right? That she had persuaded the Labour Party in many ways to move closer to the center. But we made a decision that we would move narratively as a country into this era where you would make your own path. It was very much the American story. There is this opportunity to make your own path, and anyone can be successful, and those who are successful will work out how to help the people who are not. And of course, that's not what's happened, because when you give humans too much power, they abuse it. That's why we have governance. It's why we have governments. It's why we have parliaments. And so I think we have been, to some extent, the system, so you spoke about this earlier, has trained us to go, am I all right? Have I got everything I want? And then I'll help. So I saw two things in my first research project, which was about, were women in leadership living into their full potential? Beyond the last question, this was 10 years ago. The two things that came out very clearly were, I only had one person in a bunch of interviews, I think I did about 70, who, when I said what matters to you most, did not say, I want to make a difference. Only one. She was so standout because she had no interest in that whatsoever. Everybody else said, I want to make a difference. What was so stark about that program, that research work, was almost everybody was saying, what I'm going to do is bank everything I need, and when I retire, I'll go and help. And I'll be honest and say, I just wasn't a big fan of that.
It's a bit me first and then everyone else.
Yeah, but I get it. Right. So and because on the one, we've been like bombarded with put your own oxygen mask on first, right? We've been bombarded with that message, like, look after yourself, find your boundaries. And part of my work now in Wise Rebel is 1 foot in your soul, 1 foot on the inside of you, and 1 in the world, right? So you do still live in this, and you have choices about whether you make it all about you or whether you respond to this undeniable data point that says you want to make a difference, right? And so how do you not, and these are dilemmas, like everything I'm teaching in Wise Rebel is dilemmas, right? How do you find your place? And that's challenging. Like, one of the classes I teach is, can I participate? It's almost like, can I be a good person and earn lots of money? Like, it's one of the classes that I teach. I don't have answers. By the way, this program must drive people mad because I never have answers. I just offer ideas because there is no answer.
No, and it's for the individual to decide, right? That's the
Yeah.
1 foot in them. You get to choose.
Yeah. But my point with profound service is, wherever you are, there is an opportunity to be in service.
Yes.
And that profound service, and it has that word in front of it, honestly, mainly because I was a customer service director, and so there are lots of connotations around service for me that are not that helpful. And so I had to put a word with it that helped remind me of what I was talking about. Profound service says, will I have the courage to find a way to address what is crying out for service here? Will I find a way? And so I do think a lot of my first book is called Remarkably Easy. It's much funnier than the second one. People are entertained by it. Yeah, it's a very different book. And I talk a lot about what if this was easy.
Yeah.
And in Wise Rebel, I also acknowledge not everything is, and there are these moments where you want to say, I'll source a little bit of extra courage here. I will commit to the service. Because, when I ran the call centres, as an example, having grown up in inner city Liverpool, and I lived this very strange life. I lived on a very deprived council estate, but we lived in the only big house. It was burnt down many years later. And I won a scholarship to a private school. So I lived in two worlds there, like completely different worlds. But they're my people. Like I'm interested in the ones who didn't draw the great lottery ticket, because it is a crock of shit that we are where we are through pure merit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not true.
Yeah.
And so, and you've got to do extraordinary mental contortions to get to that place. And so I think profound service says, how do I make use of, for me at least, this is how I interpret it, how do I make use of the privilege I've been given?
Yeah.
Not easy.
Gosh, Danielle, there's so much. I just wish we had another, we might need to put a second podcast to this, but in the time that we have, I'm thinking about your evolution. I'm thinking about your first book, Funny, What If This Was Easy? Possibly where you were at the time, maybe thinking it was a bit easier. Second book, actually, there's a bit more. This is a bit harder than I thought. There's a few more dilemmas and a few more paradoxes as you yourself mature, grow, and are probably stuck in those, and then trying to figure them out, and then coming up with some really useful ways for both you and the reader to consider those dilemmas without losing themselves. And then the theme in your life of these two worlds, inner city Liverpool in the biggest house, but also how your service is because they were your community, and you recognized that it wasn't merit that had you in that house. It was just luck or karma, or however you want to look at it. So the thread then, the golden thread is, now that I understand that, and I understand the dilemmas in that and the complexity in that, I want to be of service to this community. Does that lead us now on to your new revised way of what can you offer us that's going to help us be of service to the people that we care about?
Yeah.
That's an evolution from remarkable leadership?
Yeah, great question. So the beauty of doing archetype work, and we haven't really spoken to that, but the remarkable leadership for your listeners is based on 3 archetypes. So the victim, we exclude abuse and all of those scenarios. I'm certainly not saying people are responsible for what extraordinarily miswired people do to them, right? I'm not saying that, but this sense of, if only everybody else would change, I would be fine. And so I'm not going to do anything. That victim mindset. Then I taught disbanding the warrior. So this idea that you don't fight to the death for everything. It's the anger, right? The rage that burns up inside you. Don't just run around declaring war, and don't kill yourself. Like, don't be willing to die on the battlefield for trivia, because that's what takes you out. I just described myself coming out of the game for 3 days. That was because my warrior was like, I'll have this one, and off we'll go. And then this idea of sovereign leadership, which says, I'm in this for a long game. I want to create a flourishing nation, metaphorically. So I'm going to have to be more measured and poised and thoughtful about where I put my time, who I bring in to advise me, all of those things. So that's the most whistle-stop tour of that book I could ever give you.
Well done.
What I've done now is, having asked everybody to retire their corporate warrior, their fighting energy, I'm now bringing in a new warrior. I'm bringing in the golden warrior. So the great thing about archetypes, there are thousands of them. I can play any way I like. So if you think about, I'm using a lot of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is really ironic for somebody who spent her whole life saying, I really don't like war and I'd like to have less of it. Ancient Eastern text, which actually is military strategy, right? That's what that book is. I don't recommend people read it. It's not particularly easy to get your head around, but I like to mine things for useful information. what that book, the premise of that book is, though, that everybody needs a warrior who is prepared for war and does everything they can to prevent it, right? Which is quite different. So you do not want to learn about how war works when you're in it, right? Which is exactly my point about uncertainty. You want to have somebody in your council that has done the work and will hold everybody steady with great leadership when the trialing times come. And so I'm really exploring at the moment for myself, and you notice this, I'm always teaching what's alive for me. I mean, it's just a great privilege to be able to do that. This idea of, I don't have a golden warrior, what I do, because I'm working on it right now. And it's almost like martial arts training for the mind, like I've a broken spine. I couldn't go and do martial arts. It's not my thing anyway. I'm not particularly, I'm a head carried around my body, is how I would describe it. I try really hard to pay attention to my body, but it's not a primary thought. Lots of people can do a lot of work through their body, and I'm quite envious of them, to be honest. But this idea that there is a part of me that I am asking to dedicate its attention to unflappability.
Okay.
Because, and I have my wall is covered in messages that I've written to myself, and one of them says, "Hello, I've been expecting you," right? And that's my permanent reminder that life is always going to mess with my plans. Even if we weren't in this era of uncertainty, people in my life are going to die. Shit's going to happen. Right?
Guaranteed.
Now I can be like, well, I'll just handle that when it comes. Or there's nothing wrong with that as a method. It's just not what I'm choosing to do right now. Or I can say, I'm pretty sure there is some preparation I can do that will allow me to be alive in a different way in that era. And so my focus right now is, having spent 10 years, and then prior to that in my actual corporate career, really harnessing the sovereign energy, the queen energy, the king energy. Now I'm saying, this is really interesting, because I banished the badly behaved warrior. Let's describe it as that. Now I need to introduce a golden warrior who is focused, disciplined, does not lose their head in these moments, because I feel like, and especially those of us who are in the leadership development and the coaching world, it is incumbent on us to learn those skills, not just personally, but if we're talking about profound service, they are needed in this era.
Yeah.
But it's not, what I'm seeing already, no surprises. This is not an easy energy to commit to, not because the work is any more difficult than anything else. It feels a little bit less fun, right? And because it's like, you're going to be doing your reps for a really long time. I met a guy recently on a class I was teaching, and I'd asked the whole of this leadership team to name on a Trello board what kept each other awake at night. And what he said really, really, to me, spoke to the Golden Warrior. So when we got to him, I just said, has anyone got it right? Like, who of your colleagues has got this right? And they were in a very stressful environment. And he said, X has said that I sleep very well at night, and I do. And I said, why? And he said, because I've dedicated 10 years of my life to understanding happiness.
Wow.
Yeah. And we had this conversation about how everybody wants a quick hack, right? My sense with the sovereign energy and with the golden warrior, more actually with the golden warrior than the sovereign, is this is not quick, but it's like the best time to plant a tree is today.
20 years ago.
Yeah. And so it's this commitment to, look, something took me out today. Not now I'm gonna look at my own process. I'm gonna observe my own process. I'm gonna see where it's like, one of the Stoics says something like, if it's not just the incident that does have some impact, but then it's how you allow it to take you out.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that does most of the damage. And
Like the
again, this is
pain and suffering. There's
yeah,
the pain of what happened, and then there's the suffering that you turn
perpetuate.
in your head over afterwards.
Yeah. And I think, again, this is such a fine line. Like, I don't want to make this simple, because I don't think it is. And that's why I think it's a practice. In my preferences, we do more of it in collective than individually, because we help each other.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do these things when we're not doing them on our own, right? But it is, I don't want to say, oh my God, I don't feel the world. I don't want to say I don't have emotions. I don't want to say that I'm going to pretend that's okay when it's not. What I don't want any of these things to do is incapacitate me for any longer than necessary.
Yeah.
And that's the line that I'm working on right now. And I think we would do very, very well to cultivate leaders who are willing to put the reps in for this period of possibility and chaos that I believe is around for at least the next 5 years.
Gosh, I love so much in that, Danielle. And I'm mindful of time, but I'm also, my own kind of interpretation of what you just shared there is that, that 10-year dedication to have the kind of mind that you can switch off when you need to go to sleep.
Exactly.
Have the kind of mind, he's calling it happiness, but it's that, they call it's the sattvic, very clear and clean. And I'm also thinking that the reason why we want leaders with that skill set is because in terms of emotion contagion, if you're showing up with that energy and that clarity, you are going to radiate that. That's the contagion.
Mm.
That's what we're needing because leadership is incredibly hard. And
Mm.
oftentimes what happens is the leader is not that. We have our human moments and then, we spread the opposite, which is, well, the most contagious emotion, which is anxiety. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So creating spaces where we can learn to be that clear, clean, aligned leader so that we can basically do everything that is possible before we take up arms and go to war, either
Yeah.
metaphorically or in reality. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking.
But and we don't know, it doesn't have to be war, right? We don't send astronauts off to space with no bloody training. We spend all our time Navy SEALs, surgeons. These fields are in the practice of how do I stay steady in the most uncertain moments.
Yes.
So I don't think we have to go to the whole man up era to do that. We gather, and this is what I do. I'm gathering the ideas from these different spaces to say, well, what can we learn from these people who have had to cultivate the capacity to find clarity in the moment. And it's not to say we get it right, but I would far rather have a calm leader in chaos than one who's crapping themselves,
Me too. Absolutely. I'm also thinking though, and we'll start to kind of draw things. So my daughter's training to be a paramedic, and there is a paramedic mindset.
Yes.
And I think it's incredible, her capacity to be able to operate and know exactly what to do in a difficult situation. And she's been in quite a few of them now.
You're getting her on the podcast.
I think,
I'd like to listen to that one.
You might be the next one. So, but it's that. But what I'm curious about, and I'm still curious about, because listening to her recently from another very stressful situation that she was in, she's brilliant in the moment, as I am. But then it's the aftermath. How do you start? And it's what you were talking about. How do you kind of then make sure that you get that first aid mental health to be able to process what you had to maybe suppress in the moment and then kind of really integrate it so that when you come back clean, you come back aligned. And it's the speed with which you can do that turnaround. So that's just what I was thinking. And it's the same whether as a paramedic or a senior leader, or if you're the head of Oracle. I mean, it's the same skill set, which is part of the simplicity, right? We can learn these skills and we can apply them in lots of different areas because we take ourselves with us in wherever we go. So, well, Danielle, that's kind of bringing us up to time. I just want to say such a rich conversation, so many really important themes. Wish we could have 2 hours, but that might be a bit of a stretch for our listeners. They have really busy lives. I recommend Danielle's book, please. Where is it? Remarkable Leadership. There's lots of really good stuff that's just going to start you thinking about how to build the skills you need so that you can be the leader we want to be in those moments. And then check out Wise Rebel website for the new courses and opportunities to learn and grow and keep building this skill set.
It's wiserebelacademy.com.
wiserebelacademy.com.
And I just want to say thank you. It's always a real pleasure to be interviewed thoughtfully. Let's describe it as that. So these are questions I haven't been asked, and that takes some skill. So thank you for making it so, what's the word? So intellectually stimulating for me, like keep me on my toes.
We wanted to keep it real. Keep it spontaneous. It always brings a certain element of
It's part of the fun, isn't it?
fun. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye for now.